Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream is made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskind Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Dan Malthrop. I'm the chief executive here. I'm also a proud member of the City Club. In my office is a wall covered in sticky notes. On each note is a name, and they're all grouped. There's a bunch under politics, there are a few others under education, and then there's this one column, this one group that we call Local Heroes. The Local Heroes series is sponsored by Dominion, and we're very grateful for the support because it gives us a chance to cut across a wide range of topic areas and lift up individuals from our own community and put the spotlight on them for a second so we can all see what great work they're doing. Our speaker today has had her name on my wall for a while. Let me tell you why. I should say her name too. Why not? Dr. Lisa Damour. First of all, as the director of Laurel School's Center for Research on Girls, she has quietly been developing cutting-edge, nationally recognized research on how girls experience the challenges of youth and adolescence. She has her own clinical practice and also teaches through the Schubert Center for Child Studies at Case Western Reserve University. And she also has these connections with the New York Times that ought to be noted. She writes a monthly adolescence column for the New York Times Well Family Online Report, and her most recent book, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood, which was published by Random House in February, became an instant New York Times bestseller. I sort of watched that happen. An Amazon bestseller, a New York Times bestseller, you could sort of see its progression very, very vividly. But the big reason that she's a local hero, and you'll see this in her speech and during the Q&A, is that her understanding of childhood and adolescent development is a lifeline to parents and children. When she answers questions or frames an issue, she grounds her response in the research, and she communicates in a way that quickly reduces anxiety. And in her roles in our community, she has helped countless families through challenging times. These children who benefit from her work are, of course, our next generation of citizens and leaders. So, ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming my friend, Dr. Lisa Damour.
Dan, thank you. And let's talk about a local hero, right? We could not do better as a community. And thank you to Your Teen Magazine for sponsoring this, another amazing crowd of local heroes. So I am honored to be here. I am so lucky to do what I get to do for a living. I am so grateful to work with teenage girls. I am so grateful that girls and their families let me into their lives. And I want you to enjoy a leisurely lunch because you are all leaving with tons of homework. So rest up. The only people not leaving are the girls. They do not get more homework from me today. Everybody else is getting more homework from me today. So what I'm going to start with, actually, I sort of thought I would do sort of a City Clubbish state of the state. So let me just say a little bit about teenagers in general today. So we are actually raising the best behaved generation of adolescents on record. And I think we got to say that. We talk about teens in ways that are never fair, I think. But what we know is that this population of adolescents uses drugs and alcohol less than any population before them. There are a couple of substances that are spiking in ways that are scary to us, opiates in particular. But on the whole, they are way better than we were. And I think we need to acknowledge that. This is also a population that drives more safely than any population of adolescents before them. And part of this has to do with graduated driver's license laws, where you don't just get your license at 16 like we did and then just do whatever the heck you want. And in 2013, we had the lowest number of car fatalities in 40 years for adolescents. So just to be clear. Okay, now the girls are all on the good side of all of these things. Compared to teenage boys, teenage girls actually, when you put all the substances together, they use less than teenage boys do. They are also way safer drivers. And I take every chance I can with girls to say, look, if it's you or a guy driving, you drive. You drive. Girls also excel academically in ways we have never seen before. They get better grades than boys do, and this starts at the beginning of school and goes all the way through. They are less likely than a boy to repeat a grade or drop out of school. They consistently outperform boys in reading and writing. They do as well as boys in mathematics. They are more likely than boys to enroll in college. They are more likely than boys to go to college. They outnumber boys tremendously, and they are more likely to complete college. So, these are disparities that are actually not just true in the US. These are international disparities. Even where there is an achievement gap, when we see racial disparities in achievement, which we do, even in those, the girls are still outperforming the boys. The girls are doing great at school. The teen birth rate is also at an all-time low. We've never had fewer teenagers giving birth than we do right now. This had been dropping steadily in the United States since 1991. And then, interestingly, I'm going to tell you an interesting story. In 2009, the rates fell off a statistical cliff. They had been dropping at a rate of about 2.5% a year, and then suddenly, between 2009 and 2012, they started dropping at a rate of 7.5% a year. So these economists who look at this, they were like, what is going on? And somebody said, it's the TV show 16 and Pregnant. And they were right. So here's how the research worked. So 16 and Pregnant came on MTV in 2009. And a lot of people criticized the show. It's glamorizing pregnancy, it's putting being a pregnant teenage girl is making you famous, this is terrible, right? In fact, and I will tell you, I never really watched the show, but if you watch the show, it actually gave a very realistic depiction of what it meant to be 16 and pregnant. And it followed these girls through long labors, through C-sections, through health complications, sleep deprivation, and also usually strained or collapsing relationships with their baby's father. So these two economists, Carney and Levine, started doing this really interesting methodology where they would look at when a show had aired, and then they would look at Google searches and Twitter activity in the wake of the show. And what they found were there were all these jumps on Google for searches for birth control, right? And then they would find all of these great tweets in Twitter. Still not overly impressed with my decision to take a spring class. I've seen better choices on 16 and Pregnant. Another one, seriously, watching 16 and Pregnant is birth control itself. So here's what they found. When the rubber really hit the road, they looked at where there was most market penetration for 16 and Pregnant, and they were able to show that the birth rates dropped most precipitously in those markets. Interestingly, the abortion rates did not go up. This was about fewer pregnancies, not about more abortions. Girls were not getting pregnant. Finally, these economists are really tough methodologists. Like, they very rarely draw big conclusions. But they ultimately felt that the show alone was responsible for a staggering 1/3 of the overall decline in teen births in the US in the 18 months after it first aired. Unbelievable. Go MTV, right? So, not to editorialize too much here, but I just want to say, if we're talking about the critical work of raising teenage girls, let's start with the reality that girls do really well with the truth, right? And that is what 16 and Pregnant was largely about. So girls are doing great. I mean, in short, if we look big picture, girls in America are doing great, better than they've really probably ever done before. So what's all this critical work we have to do? Okay, so we have 3 areas where we have a lot of work to do. Number 1, women remain sorely, shamefully underrepresented in STEM fields. I could give you just, horrible numbers of statistics. I'm going to give you one. In computer science and engineering, women make up less than 1/5 of the workforce, right? And I mean, the fields of the future. I mean, what a big deal this is. Where is the biggest hole in the pipeline that gets women to these STEM careers? I think the biggest hole is middle school math, right? And one of the things that I will say when I'm being me, I guess, is I will say, middle school math, girls, middle school, and math, it's like a Bermuda Triangle. They go in and they don't come out. Okay, so what happens? What happens in middle school math for girls? Well, we have some really interesting research that shows that it has to do with how girls and boys explain successes and failures. And here's what we see. When girls do well, they are likely to attribute something to an external cause. They will say, well, I did well because the test was easy, the teacher likes me, I got lucky. And when they do poorly, they will attribute it to themselves. I'm not good at math. Boys do the flip. When they do well, they say, aren't I awesome at math? Right? And when they do poorly, they will say, well, it was a dumb test, or the teacher doesn't like me, or I didn't study. If I study for the next one, I'm fine. So here's the upshot. Middle school math gets hard, right? Usually, by the time you hit middle school math, you're seeing stuff you haven't seen before. It requires some sweat. It requires some elbow grease. And when girls come up against that, their first reaction is, I guess I'm not good at this anymore. Watch me stop, right? And that's what they do. You will hear middle school math teachers who teach boys complaining, the boys don't get it and they don't even know it, right? They think they're doing fine and they're not doing fine. This is good for the boys because they stick with it, right? So even if it's a little bit delusional for some of the boys, they're still signing up for math. So girls, on the other hand, aren't. So what do we do about this on the school side? Well, some great research. Everybody should read the book Mindset by Carol Dweck. Really focuses on the idea that outcomes are about effort. They are not about talent, right? If you want to get somewhere, you have to work. We have infused this into every cell of every person at Laurel School. This lives in the day. A girl at Laurel School knows that we are always talking about, we do not talk about talent. We talk about effort. You get out what you put in. You are only growing when the work is hard. The harder you work, the smarter you get. And every girl at Laurel knows that if she says, I can't do something, an adult who is standing right by or a friend who is standing right by will say, you cannot do it. Yes. Thank you, Laurel Table. Okay, so where do you all fit into this process? So here's your first bit of homework. Many of you, I am sure, have young people in your life who look at you and ask about your career or your path or how you got where you are. I want you to commit right here, right now, that you will not focus on your glitzy mid or late career achievements in those conversations. I think that can easily be heard by young people as evidence that the central feature here is talent, right? You got where you got on talent. I want you to talk about your lousy first job. Everybody had a lousy first job. I want you to talk about that job. I want you to talk about the winding road you took to where you are today. I want you to talk about your mistakes along the way. I want you to talk about how hard it was to get to where you got. I will tell you when people say, gosh, you're like a really pretty solid writer. I will say, yeah, I was not when I came out of graduate school. I did a whole lot of writing on a whole lot of books with some really smart people and some really great editors. And after a long time, I got better. Like I really try to say that. When people say, oh, you're a pretty solid speaker, I will say, I was not. When I came out of graduate school, there was this one course I taught at Michigan with 400 students in a 3-story auditorium, and I had to teach that class 3 times a week, and I almost threw up 3 times a week on the way into that class, but by the end of the semester, I was better. So those are the conversations we need to have with young people. The more girls and young women who understand this, the more girls who understand that sweat is what is required to get where you want to go, the more girls we will have sticking with subjects that don't come easy, like math in middle school. Okay, your next round of homework. We, and I include myself in this we, have become desensitized to sexism. We are used to it. We are bathed in degrading representations of women, and we don't even see them anymore. I think there's a way in which it's just noise at this point. We are so accustomed to the double standards to which women are held that we can take them just as givens that we have to combat. And I think we can feel utterly resigned to the seemingly unbudgeable wage gap, right? This is flagrant sexism, and we just kind of walk around with it. But the research tells us that the sexism to which we have all, I think, like it or not, become inured, is actually extremely harmful to girls. We have evidence that the more sexist and sexualized content girls consume as part of their media diet, the more likely they are to hold stereotypical views about gender roles. Further, compared to girls who question chauvinism, girls who come to accept these media messages are less likely to take the necessary steps to prevent pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections, and they are more likely to suffer from eating disorders, low self-esteem, and depression. These are not just words, these are not just images, they actually impact girls' health and their mental health. We also know that being objectified, being made to worry about one's body, can actually keep a girl from thinking straight. And I'm going to tell you about an amazing study done at the University of Michigan, done by the Department of Psychology. This is where I got my training, actually. I didn't do this study, but I knew some people who did. Where they went into classes and they told the students, first of all, psychologists always start with a lie, right? We tell them what we're doing. We're not actually doing what we say we're doing. So we went in and we said, we're doing a study of consumer behavior. So who would like to sign up for this study of consumer behavior? So we got a bunch of men and a bunch of women to sign up for the study. They then came into a lab where half of the men and half of the women went into dressing rooms where they found sweaters to try on in various sizes. The other half of the men and the other half of the women went into dressing rooms where they found bathing suits to try on in various sizes. Trunks for the men, one piece for the girls, for the women. They were told to put on the assigned clothing and to wear it for a while to see how they felt about it for when they filled out their consumer preferences forms, which were just baloney. So they're sitting in their dressing rooms. There's a mirror in the dressing room, one person per dressing room. And then the psychologists, we do a further lie. We say, oh, well, while you're just sitting there, would you just mind taking this math test for our friends in the Department of Education, right? So we give them the math test. Okay. So we don't have friends in the Department of Education. We're psychologists. We're not nice people. But indeed, what we were measuring, what's getting measured in this moment is, does sitting in a bathing suit impact how a girl does on a math test? And the answer is a big fat yes, even though she's alone. Just for what it's worth, it did not have any effect on how the boys did on their math test. We thought maybe if we went back and made them wear Speedos, something else would happen, but in trunks, they are okay. So here's what I want you guys to think about. If sitting alone, these are University of Michigan undergraduate women, right? These are smart, competent people. If sitting by themselves in a dressing room with a mirror and a math test can cause them to lose that much intellectual bandwidth, what does it mean for our phenomenal girls who are peppered by these images all day, every day? So, okay, here we are. I think inured to this background noise of sexism that we don't even notice it, don't even appreciate its impact, don't appreciate how much it hurts girls' mental health, physical health, and intellectual strength. And I really believe this is worse for teenage girls than it is for adult women, right? As adult women, we have had time to show our strength. We have had time to get good at something. We've had time to show our skills. And I think it's really hard for any 13-year-old in the world, no matter how fabulous and competent she is, to feel that she has strengths that she can share with the whole world and everybody can see. And I think it's really hard, especially when all she sees are images that tell her, we don't really care about your brain. We really care about how you look in a bikini, right? And that is her environment. As an adult woman, when I am tuned into these things, I just get mad, right? I think as a 13-year-old, I don't know that I knew I was supposed to be as indignant as I had a right to be. So here's your homework. You ready? We are going to go back to treating sexism as the scourge it really, really is. Okay. Thank you. We are going to react as strongly to bimbo as we would to a homophobic slur or a racist slur. We are going to remember these are all the low end of a continuum that gets to hateful, hateful realities. And bimbo is right there too. When people use sexist terms in our presence, we are going to confront them with the fact that they are using a term that dehumanizes girls and women, and it degrades the person who's using it. We don't often get to do that. When we can't confront the person directly, we are still going to make an issue of it, and we are going to refuse to participate as passive members in this. So if you are watching TV and there is something typically exploitive happening on TV, you are going to turn to your son or your daughter or your niece or your nephew, and I really mean it, your son and your nephew, every bit as much as your daughter and your niece. I really mean that. We cannot do right by the girls until we are doing right by the boys. And we are going to say, hey, that girl is being depicted for her looks. She's being exploited for her looks. She's being treated as if she's dumb. Why don't we turn this off because we are participating by watching it? And that is a line I stole from Mary Beth Hicks, who's an author, and I just think it's a beautiful line. If you're even watching it, you are participating in it. When we hear sexist terms coming out of our television, when we hear them thrown around, We are going to turn to the young people in our lives and we are going to say, that is hateful and hurtful language. I am so sorry you had to hear that. Never, never forget that those words say nothing about girls and women and a huge amount about the person who is using them. We have to be vigilant. We have to do this job. Okay, finally, here comes your last bit of homework. And unfortunately, I have to go back and pop that 16 and pregnant bubble on this one. Despite the fact that we have the lowest teen birth rate on record, American girls actually have, adolescent girls have the worst sexual health in the industrialized world. We look at this in terms of rates of abortions, births, and pregnancies, and we are at rock bottom for industrialized nations. There are many, many reasons for this. Sex ed, access to contraception, things like that. But there is a reason that has to do with an element of our culture in which we all participate. And I would say I still participated even though I don't mean to, but I've gotten better lately. And this is the issue. When we talk with girls about their romantic lives, adults as a group tend to talk about risk. Don't get pregnant. Don't get yourself in a bad position. Don't get hurt. It's a list of don'ts. That's how we talk to girls about their romantic lives. And I'm not saying that this is a bad idea, right? These are things we don't want to have happen. But I am saying that it reinforces sort of a harmful idea, which is that when it comes to the physical side of romance, boys are on offense and girls are on defense. That's how we describe it. And when we don't endow girls with romantic wishes or young women with sexual agency, they don't act like agents. When we tell them to watch out, they give away any sense that they are in charge of this process. In contrast, cultures, namely the Netherlands, which also has a lot of different things that go on from our culture, they focus on romance as being about enjoyment and responsibility for all parties. They have the best adolescent sexual health in the world. In other words, when you treat girls like agents, they act like agents. When they feel like they have a right to be there, they act like someone who's prepared to be there. And they take better care of themselves in romantic endeavors. Interestingly, just for what it's worth, this sort of positive approach to sex education does not lead to more sexual activity, which is often, I think, a concern people have. If we talk openly about this being a fun thing, they're going to go out and do it more. No, they do not, actually. But what it does seem to lead to is safer sexual activity, and I would also like to presume happier sexual activity. So I have really changed my practice for how I talk with girls about their romantic lives. And that word romantic, is kind of quaint, and I will tell you exactly why I use it, and I now tell girls exactly why I use it. For me, romantic does two really useful jobs. For me, romantic includes hand-holding, maybe in 5th or 6th or 7th grade, and then everything that comes after that. So romantic for me means I'm talking to the whole room. And also for me, romantic means whoever you have your romances with, right? I mean that often when we're talking about this defense-offense thing, we're talking about boys and girls, but I also want to include everyone in the room, regardless of who they enjoy their romantic lives with. So here's what I say to girls. I say, now, as you think about your romantic life, and I've gotten past the quaint term because I've explained it, I say the most important thing for you to think about first is, what do you want? What do you want? I will tell you, when I say this to girls, you should see the looks on their faces. They are sort of like, they don't know what to make of me. What is this strange grown-up? And I've actually had 9th grade girls blurt out, I have never had an adult say that to me. Right? But why not? And then I say, the next thing for you to think about once you have a sense of what you want is to think about, what does my partner want? Right? You're going to want to get to know that. Then together you're going to figure out, well, what do we want? And usually the we is whoever wants least wins, no negotiation. Then I say, after that, if there's risks involved, you'll need to address those with your partner. But that's where we are. So here is your homework. Here's your homework. If you are ever standing there with a young person, male or female, when the topic of romance comes up, figure out how to get the word want into that conversation. So if you're watching a movie where a girl faces a romantic dilemma, say out loud, even though it'll make your teenager crazy, well, what does she want? What does she want? If you are listening to a raunchy song, and I've got no problem with that, say, wow, he's got a lot to say about what he wants. I wonder what she wants. Of course, your teenager will also want to jump out of the car, but that is okay. It is okay. I will tell you, I recently had a conversation, that something that goes on is that it is not uncommon for 6th, 7th, and 8th grade boys to press girls to send inappropriate photos, right? This is a thing that is very much a thing. And when you talk with girls about how to handle that dilemma, a lot of what they're struggling with is they don't want to do it, but they don't want to hurt their future social connections to that person or the person to whom that person is connected, other people. So when we give our adultish advice, say no, I'm going to tell a grown-up. All of these things, they kind of go, that has more repercussions than the girl is necessarily always ready to face. So I said to the girl, what if you just wrote back, I don't want to, right? And she was like, oh, this was somehow a radical idea. But we are the ones who've made it radical. We don't talk about want, and they don't get to want because we haven't framed things in those ways. Along those lines, while many of us who take care of young people are involved in incredibly important conversations about consent, right? This is a topic everywhere, as it should be. I have to tell you, I've started to have a problem with that term. To me, consent has a little bit of an air of allowing or giving in. And I think if we really want to try to get past this problematic boys are on offense, girls are on defense frame, I wonder as we talk with teenagers, boys and girls, that we don't say, you want to ensure consent, right? I think I might drive my own daughters crazy by saying, you want to ensure enthusiastic agreement, right? Right? This is romance, right? This is supposed to be fun for everybody at the party. We should not be looking for quiet acquiescence. I think we can do way better than that. I think we should be looking for robust endorsements of what's happening in these settings. So, okay, I want to wrap up here. I want to thank you for thinking with me. I have to tell you, girls are such a precious resource. I love them. I love being in their company, and they are thriving in so many, many ways. But they still run into barriers that adults create or unwittingly participate in. And they deserve better, and we can do better. So before I go, I'm going to remind you of your homework. You ready? Okay. We will speak openly with all young people, but especially with young women, about the missteps, misfires, and meanderings on your path from where you were at 13, 14, or 15 to where you are today. In doing so, we will remind girls that effort and persistence, not luck or talent, are a girl's best friends. We will not allow ourselves to become desensitized to sexism, and we will fight it everywhere we can and do so openly in front of young men and young women. And we will change how we talk about girls and romance to remind everyone that females aren't just equal partners in our society, we're still working on that one, but they should also be equal partners in romance. We will put conversations about want before conversations about risk. And of course, we'll keep having those conversations about risks. Those are real. Because we know that when we do, girls take better care of themselves, which is the goal here. We will encourage all young people, both young men and young women, to remember that the physical side of romance is as much about joy for both parties as it is about responsibility. We will do that because that is the right thing to do. And I will say, and I will end here, and I also think that is what Prince would have wanted us to do. So there will be time for questions.
Oh, I'm so glad you dropped the Prince line. That's good. We are here to celebrate this thing called life. And we are enjoying a Friday forum featuring Dr. Lisa Damour, director of Laurel School's Center for Research on Girls and author of Untangled, guiding teenage girls through the 7 transitions into adulthood. Perhaps one of you will ask a question about all 7 of those transitions, so we know more about what the book is about. It's funny, back before we got started, I was telling Lisa about the creed of the City Club, and there's this line, I have no axe to grind, no logs to roll, all of that, and Lisa was like, whoa, I got an axe to grind. And we're glad you do. So we're about to head into the Q&A. We welcome questions from everyone, including guests and students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast, our webcast, or our new live simulcast at the Parma Snow branch of the Cuyahoga County Public Library. If you'd like to tweet a question, please tweet it at the City Club, and our staff will try to work it into the program. We want to remind you, too, that your questions should be brief and to the point, and again, we ask you to stand up to ask your question. Holding our microphones today are our Director of Programming, Stephanie Jansky, and Content Associate, Teddy Eisenberg. May we have the first question, please?
Okay, you want to hold it? Okay. Well, thank you so much. It is an amazing opportunity for all of us. I feel like, can you lean a little forward? I feel like the professionals in education are challenged with social media, and I would like to know within Laurel's organization and then more broadly, we're kind of in the I don't know what to do with their devices, and how do we deal with the fact that they're advertising their entire lives? It's the selfie, it's the narcissism, and what are educators doing about this?
Okay, so let's do 3 hours. And I mean, it's so complicated. It's so unbelievably complicated. I think all schools make their policies. I think all schools are doing their best. I think it's a challenge for our teenagers. It's a challenge for us. Here's, I think, a universal thing that I just find is a great place to start when thinking with teenagers about their social media. I have yet to come across an impulse that is acted out on in social media that I do not remember having myself as a teenager. And I think it's easy to forget. So we talk about selfies, we talk about preoccupation with looks. I will confess I was a swimmer, competitive swimmer, and I remember very clearly in my 9th grade year refusing to breathe on the blocks because I was trying to suck in my stomach, because there was a really cute boy who sat in the front row who was not paying attention to me at all, but it made total sense to me at 14 that for the minute or so before the gun went off, I would stand on the blocks, not breathing, and then the gun would go off and I would go in the air before I hit the water. There was nothing in the world that made more sense to me at the time. I grew up in Colorado. We skied, and I remember, despite my own ridiculousness at swim team, the derision we would consider the girls from Cherry Creek High School, which we hated, because they skied with butane-activated curling irons in their parkas so that they could touch up their bangs at lunch. So we were ridiculous. I mean, I am not at all convinced we were the only ones. So I think, the first place to say is, what part of this is adolescence? Just adolescence in all its wonderful weirdness, right? And then, what part of this is adolescence from which teenagers do not get a break and deserve a break, right? So at least with whatever ridiculousness I was doing in the swim team, at least I went home and nobody could see me, right? And I got some time off. And so I think as we talk with teenagers about their social media, I think we talk about it in terms of things from which they deserve some reprieve, right? They deserve reprieve from knowing who said what about whom, 24/7. That's just too much information. They deserve reprieve from worrying about how they look. Everybody does. They deserve reprieve from all of the things to which they can access that none of us can resist sometimes. So I think to the degree, I think there's a lot adults can do and need to do to contain it in a teenager's life. But I think it's always better to start in the spirit of, if I had had a phone when I was a teenager, I would have done exactly what that teenager is doing with their phone, probably weirder. And so I'm on the side of some sleep, some focused study, some time off from worrying about how you look, some time off from worrying about whatever ridiculousness happened at school today. And I know you don't feel like I'm on your team, but I'm completely on your team when I'm asking you to give me your phone for a little while.
I taught high school girls for 10 years, so I really appreciate everything you said, especially the distinction between agency and victim. I wonder if you'd comment on the internalized oppression dynamic, where I constantly hear young girls refer to themselves as guys, teenage girls refer to themselves as guys, older women refer to themselves as guys. It drives me crazy.
Okay. This is interesting. So in my other life, I'm sort of a junior-varsity linguist because my best friend is a linguist. So I've spent a huge amount of time thinking about language. So yeah, guys becomes hey guys, come on. So I will tell you, here's I think what linguists would say. That is a function of the failure of the term gals. Right? And it fills a gap in the language. Like, gals just never made it, right? And we don't know why gals never made it. But it's really interesting because for men, there's boy, guy, man. And you will hear, and they're not rough, that's not always in that order, but there's sort of a nice space that it holds. And you will hear college-age women, I remember this bristling of the day, like, I'm a woman, right? Like, wow, I was like a girl like 3 months ago. Like, what happened, And so you think, wouldn't it be great if gals had made it, Because I think it kind of would have filled in that in-between space. So I think, here's what I think a linguist would say. I think a linguist would say, I don't know that people are identifying as male in that moment or de-identifying, I think, as female. It's just a function of sort of a one word made it and the other one didn't, and somehow guys became generic and gals didn't. But we could start a movement. I could give you a fourth bit of homework, right? Which is that not only you will refer to you and your women friends as gals, you'll refer to the men friends as gals too, right? Like, we've had all this time. So come on, gal. What else you got? so we'll try to bring back gal. I think that's what it's about. Yeah. So.
Hashtag gal power.
Gal power, exactly. Yeah.
Your sense of wisdom is really quite wonderful.
Oh,
so
thank you.
Turn to you for guidance.
Uh-oh.
Some people know me. They're saying, uh-oh. I'm very much a guy, and
A gal around here.
What did she say? And I'd welcome your talking about how guys and girls too should think about appearance, because it is so ubiquitous in the way we begin and continue relationships with each other. I visited the University of Missouri last weekend, and I was kind of knocked over by all these magnificent women. Should I not react to their magnificence? I don't think so.
You can't help it. They're gorgeous.
Can't help it. It's gorgeous. But at some point, it needs to find a good balance, and maybe you've been able to help the young women you deal with especially figure out where appearance fits into the value spectrum.
Thank you for that question. I think it's a great question, and it is something I think about. We can't get past human attraction, right? I mean, it's a primitive, it happens before we mean for it to happen response. And I don't have an issue with that. And I want girls, gals, everyone to feel like to take pleasure in taking care of themselves, right? I mean, there's something really loving in wearing stuff that fits and, tending to oneself in that way. And I don't have some aspiration that our girls should stop brushing their hair and, just like that's not my goal. But I think beauty fades, right? And it's fragile. And it's a terrible place to put one's worth. I think that what I would want for everyone, but for gals in particular, is that they feel useful and that they focus most of their energies on how they can be useful to the world. If they happen to look good while they do it, that's fine too. But I feel like when it comes to attraction, I'm a mother of 2 daughters. I want whoever is attracted to them to be attracted to how useful they are, not if they are beautiful, that they be beautiful. So that's what I care about.
You mentioned earlier about taking an active role when we're talking to our children about seeing something on TV and making comments about that. But you also mentioned that there are so many things in our environment that we're all desensitized to. And I feel like I know these things, but I was wondering if you could point out a few things that are more subtle that those of us who really want to guide our girls can take heed of.
Thank you. I mean, I think Disney Channel's kind of a nightmare. I mean, it's on in my house. I mean, I'm not, I need to do stuff besides entertain my children, so Disney Channel takes part in it. But I think, I just, the dumbness of the girls, the appearance focus of the girls, and often it's kind of benign and sometimes it's kind of not. I think that that's a place that I think where it seems benign and I think it's not as benign as it looks. But I think, there's lots of ways to get this right. I will tell you, I've allowed it. What I actually really take biggest issue with, and this gets to another stereotype about girls that's unfair and wrong, is the meanness, right? That there's a lot of these TV shows that depict girls as like really cunningly, horrendously mean. And that's the one place I draw the line in terms of what we watch. I'm like, this show has way too much meanness, we're turning it off. Like, I'm very harsh about that when I'm paying attention, which isn't always. But I think, the commercials where there's a really hot woman selling cars, right? I mean, they are basically every commercial. If you start looking, it's there all the time. And you cannot, and you will not have anyone in your family who likes you anymore. You cannot comment on every one of these examples, that you see. Like, I mean, you just can't. You just can't. But I think you can say, hey, someone's making money, and it's not that woman, right? She's bringing the beauty, and she's not the one making the money here. I think you can drop them in, and your teenager will be like, enough, but do it anyway. Do it anyway.
Hello, Lisa. Hi.
Oh, there you are. Hi.
Hi, how are you? I have a question about education. I remember reading some research a while ago saying that girls do better in single-gender schools and boys do better in mixed-gender schools. And I was wondering if you had any thoughts or comments on that.
So here's what we know. When we look big, for neither boys nor girls do single-sex schools outpace or fall behind co-ed schools. It's a wash. It's a total wash. So one take on that is it depends on the kid, right? And you got to know your kid. There is some evidence, and it's pocketed and selective. All those stats I gave you about how great girls are at school, well, they raise the bar in the classroom. And that's a reality. And so studies that find, and some studies do, you get the boys out of the room, it's better for the girls, and some of it is it's getting the lead out a little bit when the boys are falling behind. Again, big picture, broad swath, no one child is implicated here. And then the idea being that when you just put a bunch of boys in the classroom, the level drops, and that harms the boys. But again, kid by kid, these studies are very, very complicated, largely because we cannot use really controlled measures. We cannot pick children and, match their families and say, we assign you to a single-sex school and we assign you to a co-ed school. So, it's all kind of a wash. So I guess what I would say is you got to know your kid. You got to know what's right. We have unbelievable educational opportunities here in Cleveland. And yet at the same time, despite all of that, I have sort of fallen in love with single-sex education for girls as I go into my 13th year at Laurel School, because of things that I think are hard to measure, but that I see. And so I'll give you an example. We had a fabulous student. We have many fabulous students, but one in particular I've stayed in touch with, went to University of Chicago from Laurel. No one would have picked her out as Laurel as a particularly strident student. She went into her seminar classroom at University of Chicago in the beginning of freshman year, and there was a seminar table and then seats around, sort of second row. She was the only woman who sat at the table, and she was appalled to see that it was her and a bunch of guys at the table, and then all the gals were in the second row. And she was horrified, absolutely horrified. And so, quite literally, this sense of having a seat at the table, I watch that kind of thing all the time. So I have a bias, I will express it, but the data are neutral as far as we have it.
Hi, Lisa. I was really fascinated with the study of taking a math test in a bathing suit. I just kind of can't possibly even fathom that. But
oh, we do so much worse. We do so much worse.
Hopeful to never fall into that trap. But I'm kind of fascinated with what your take is then on what we see as fashion for young girls, whether it's yoga pants or these very, very short shorts or these very revealing tops, and sort of what your take is on that.
So a friend and I were bemoaning how for the girls today, like thinking about how lucky we were in the 80s with our Frankie Says Relax t-shirts, that were like the size of a bed sheet, that was the look, and that was just the look, right? It was these huge, voluminous, Esprit everywhere kind of clothing. And so, yeah, times have changed, and like the look is really skin tight. I'll tell you, this is one of the biggest things I struggle with as a grown-up in our culture. It makes me worried for the girls. I don't like it. It makes me wonder what it means to take a math test in leggings, right? If we know what it means to take a math test in a bathing suit. But it becomes really circular really, really fast, right? Because the girl in leggings is self-conscious about her body because someone's made her feel self-conscious about her body. So who's at fault in this picture, right? The girl in the leggings or the person who's made her feel self-conscious. So it gets very circular very fast. So to not answer your question, I'm going to keep going on. Here's my number one beef I have with grown-ups right now. We, not necessarily we in this room, but we grown-ups do immerse girls in a culture that is very, very bodily about women, right? I mean, like, you don't see anyone in a picture in an Esprit outfit or all the imagery we see is this skin-tight, body-conscious stuff. We bathe adolescence in it. One of the things that is essential to being a teenager is you want to be more like the grown-ups, right? You want to look adult. You want to look whatever that version is right now. So then, as teenagers have always done, they imitate adult culture, right? And they play in that space. And again, teenagers are not making these images in ads. Adults are making these images in ads. And then the thing that makes me so frustrated with grown-ups, and frustrated is a nice word for it, is we then turn around and we deride the girls for imitating exactly what we have put in front of them. So I think, it's really easy to tee off on teenagers. I mean, I have to say, I think there's a whole world of negative stereotyping around teenagers where we in no way as adults take responsibility for our part in things. And I think this is a place. So I would what if fashion and imagery and TV and magazines went back to Frankie Says Relax, right? I mean, would we see different fashions in our adolescent girls? So I think they get it coming and going.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to ask what you thought about cultural impact on the 7 transitions in particular.
Oh, okay.
Are there cultural impact or ethnic impact that kind of bubbles to the surface when you talk about those transitions?
Thank you for asking. So my book has this crazy long subtitle, Guiding Girls Through the 7 Transitions into Adulthood. I don't remember it. It's so long. So here's the argument I'm laying out in the book, that there are 7 transitions that move girls from being girls into being grown-ups. I would say these are the exact same 7 transitions for boys. I'm just sort of laying out the girl version of it. I address them one per chapter, and they are parting with childhood. This is where the sexy clothes come in. Joining a new tribe, harnessing emotions, contending with adult authority, planning for the future, entering the romantic world, and caring for oneself. And basically what I say is you do those 7 jobs, you got a grown-up on your hand, and a lot of what adults don't understand or don't like about teenagers is actually teenagers doing that important work in their own way and in their own time. So one of the questions I grappled with, right, is, well, how universal is this, right? Are we talking about upper middle class white girls in Shaker? Are we talking beyond that? And I sort of feel like ever since we've had modern adolescence, which is about 100 years, or maybe it's more like 50 years, I think these are true. I think these are true. And I would say we went through the same 7 transitions as adolescents ourselves. And one particular delight of my professional life is that I train graduate students at Case Western Reserve University in the Department of Psychology. And a particular horrible irony of professional training in psychology is that when you are a graduate student, you get the most chaotic, most underserved population you will ever work with. Because we have the $5 psychology clinic where you get your Johnny psychologist who is really green, really green. So a lot of the thinking about these 7 transitions actually came out from working with my graduate students who were working with these wildly chaotic, underserved populations because so much was awry. So low income, across a broad racial, sort of swath, And as these cases came in, the way that I could get them through it and get myself through caring for them through it was to say, okay, let's think about the 7 buckets of what a teenager has to do, and let's figure out which buckets this kid's doing okay in and which buckets they're not. And that actually helped us sort of bring very stressed adolescents down to size in terms of the clinical work. So I would like to think this, is a universal argument. I am careful in the book to try to address where I think there are racial differences or SES, socioeconomic differences in terms of how things play out. So if you are a white kid experimenting with marijuana and you get picked up by the police, you are way better off than an African-American kid who experiments with marijuana and gets picked up by the police. There's shameful judicial outcomes in that. So places like that I try to play with. And then the longest section, there's many, many sections in each chapter. The longest section in my chapter on entering the romantic world is being an LGBTQ teenager and how that plays out for the adolescent and how that plays out in family life. So I aimed to be as inclusive as I could in a book that ran to almost 300 pages.
Yeah, hi, Dr. Damour.
Hi.
There's sort of a pop culture, social media phenomenon now where celebrities are tweeting naked pictures of themselves, and this is a feminist, self-empowering message. How do you square that with your 12 and 13-year-old that you don't want to send naked selfies? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Kim Kardashian. Thank you. Thanks from all the moms and all the dads, Right, I mean, I find this so frustrating. Right, I find this so frustrating. This idea that, look how empowered I am, I'm selling myself. Right, I'm not letting anybody else sell me, I'm selling myself. So I think there's so much one could say about this. I mean, I just think, again, I would say, what is she getting out of this? Okay, so she's getting paid. Okay, so she's getting paid. She's getting paid for how she looks, right? So that seems to be her job. You imagine, and I imagine, that our daughters will have other jobs that do not involve getting paid for how they look. And that would be our hope for them, because it is such a fragile, not to mention degrading, way to make money. And I would, that's how I would handle it, more as a mom than as a psychologist, I would have to say. I mean, I'm in full mom mode on this. But it's hard. I think what's so frustrating is that, when we talk about sexism and all the people who are perpetuating it, there's plenty of women who are, not helping, right? And then that, to me, is frustrating. And I think, actually, that's probably a really great conversation to be having with our daughters, right? In any degraded group, there are people who are helping the process along who are actually participating in their own degradation, right? And I think that's a conversation we should be having. And I think we can say that's probably happened always, and it happens with women.
I'm actually going to ask a question. I came across an op-ed in the New York Times this week about mansplaining and the manologue, and in it the author wrote, "Women self-censor, edit, apologize for speaking, and men expound." So how do you teach young girls to assert themselves and have their voice not get lost when they're entering the workforce or the professional setting?
Thank you for asking that question. So I started my day at Laurel School, where with my director of Laurel Center for Research on Girls hat on, we had one of our researchers come back and give a big summary to the girls about a fabulous, fabulous study we conducted a few years ago that's going into the literature now. I'm going to get to an answer. It's really going to surprise you. So here was the super cool study we did in collaboration with St. Ignatius High School downtown and with Green Hills School, which is a co-ed school in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We worked with the Department of Linguistics at the University of Michigan and tape recorded and videotaped at all 3 schools an AP English class and an honors physics class. And then these linguists who worked their fingers to the bone transcribed every darn word of, I think it's thousands of pages. So guess what? As with many ways in which women's language is criticized, that's actually a myth. The girls do not use just or like more than the boys do. The boys are actually crushing them in terms of that language. And this is a total myth, right? That girls somehow speak in a way that harms them and holds them back. There's plenty of things harming and holding girls back It's not at all clear, and in fact, the data do not support this idea that they use language in a way that is actually responsible for this. The data actually show the opposite. Interestingly, and this gets back to your question, Tamsin, about single-sex schools, can't help but brag on part of Laurel School. So the hedging is the linguistic term for the just and the like and I think and, I'm not sure this is the right answer. This is all the stuff that women get accused of. So the boys are hedging their pants off. The girls are barely hedging compared to the boys. But the exception would be when we compare the girls at Laurel versus the girls at the co-ed school. It turned out that while for the most part the boys were outpacing the girls on hedging, the girls at the co-ed school were dramatically outpacing the girls at Laurel on their hedging. So when you put women in rooms with men, something happens, but it's actually, even still, they are hedging less than the men. So I cannot begin to channel the brilliance of Chris Parsons, our researcher who was speaking to the girls today, but he really encouraged the girls to be skeptical of these stereotypes about their use of language, to question heartily anybody who's telling them how to speak, to wonder what's behind that. So that's what I think of that mansplaining article.
You're awesome. Today at the City Club, we've been enjoying a Friday forum featuring Dr. Lisa Damour, director of Laurel School's Center for Research on Girls and author of the new book, Untangled, Guiding Teenage Girls Through 7 Transitions into Adulthood. The forum is part of our Local Heroes series. It's sponsored by Dominion. Additional sponsorship today was provided by Your Teen magazine. We thank both of you for your support. We'd like to give a special welcome to guests and students and faculty and guests at the table hosted by Fairport Asset Management, along with the students, faculty, and staff who are here with Magnificat High School, Laurel School, and Urban Community School. Student participation is supported by a generous grant from the Jeffrey David Epstein Memorial Fund. We thank them for their support. Sale of Dr. Damour's book today, Untangled, is provided by a cultural exchange, and that brings us to the end of today's forum. Thank you, Dr. Damour. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is now adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club Forums on IdeaStream is made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskind Family Fund, with additional funding from Cleveland State University, Robert Conrad, and the Payne Fund.